Like a lot of people, first time I saw The Karate Kid, I thought that karate was some sort of superpower, and I wished I had a mentor like Mr. Miyagi who could not only teach me to fight, but also share his words of wisdom. The success of the film led to the sequel, The Karate Kid Part 2, which whilst not as successful, either critically or commercially, I enjoyed watching it. I'm not saying it's as good as the first film, but it was better than what came after, which was creatively titled The Karate Kid Part 3. I don't want to make it sound like I hated Part 3, it has its good points. It's interesting to see Daniel get involved with the wrong crowd, manipulated by the dark side of the karate world. There's also some pearls of wisdom from Mr. Miyagi, as well as him beating up bad guys, which never gets old. But there's some key things in the third film that really didn't work, which seems so obvious that you wonder why the film was allowed to be made that way. The first thing is that the film returns to a familiar setting, which is too familiar. We've already explored this world in the first film, and there's not anything new. We're back in an old location with the same tournament hanging over Daniel's head like in the first film. The second film, whilst not as good as the first, explored an entirely new location with different personal relationships and dynamics. In Part 3, some of the characters have changed, but it's essentially the same story. Cobra Kai bullies Daniel until he fights him at the tournament. The third film also lacks romantic interest for Daniel. Not every film needs a romantic subplot. In fact, I think it's often a sort of cheesy trope. But in this kind of film, which isn't supposed to be taken too seriously, it generally works. Jessica is a sort of pseudo love interest for Daniel, but their relationship never develops beyond friendship. This seems like a step backwards after the second film, which has a romantic subplot much more intense than the first. Generally in a sequel, the consequences for the hero's failure need to increase with each film to keep the audience engaged. In the first film, Daniel is bullied, and the consequences of his failure are that if the bullies win, he'll continue to be tortured by them after the tournament. In the second film, the stakes are raised considerably. The rivalry between Daniel and Chozen ends in Daniel having to face Chozen in a fight to the death, which he accepts with little hesitation. This is where the conflict arises with Part 3. In the third film, Daniel is afraid of his opponent and Cobra Kai, even in a tournament setting where he's unlikely to come to any serious harm. Contrast this with the Daniel who not long before agreed to fight to the death. For the viewer, the consequences of Daniel's failure in the third film seem much less severe than in the second. Ultimately, the failure of Part 3 comes down to the fact that every part of the plot is watered down compared to the previous film. The setting is too familiar to the point of being stale, the romantic interest is virtually non-existent, and most importantly, the consequences of Daniel's failure are far less than if he had lost the fight in Okinawa.